10x your service design offering with Smaply. Take 20% off any order with This Is HCD 20 off. Let's superpower you and your design team's potential. Sign up at smaply.app. Enjoy the episode from your friends at Smaply, helping support This Is HCD podcast.
Gauthier Roussilhe has specialised in the environmental footprint of the digital sector for 5 years and is certainly among the most knowledgeable people I have been lucky to chat with about these issues. He's currently doing a PhD at RMIT, that's the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology, to explore which digital infrastructures and services are compatible with a world stabilised at plus 2 degrees Celsius. I started our chat by asking Gauthier about the electricity impact of data centres.
Well, historically, there has been two assessments of how much data centers consume worldwide in terms of electricity. There have been the IEA estimates, so around like 200 terawatts hour, which is based on work from Sherby and Hall on the US data center sector. The analysis was made in 2016, and from this first analysis was then derived the IEA analysis, but also the Massonet and Kumi analysis that have been widely used so far. Other assessments comes from the Borderstem Institute in Germany that did somehow the same analysis at the EU scale and also the worldwide scale, which very different numbers. And the scenario for worldwide data center electricity consumption was around 400 terawatt hour. So the best we know so far from a worldwide perspective is that the range of electricity consumption for data centers is around 200 and 400. To be fair, don't believe, knowing how the data sets are being set up from the US side, I don't really think that it's the most realistic one, because it assumes that a large part of the worldwide data centers will go hyperscale. And they extrapolated that market penetration of hyperscale worldwide to get a number of 200 terawatt with many other factors. But at the end, that's the main hypothesis behind the work, while the German estimate is considering a less penetration rate of hyperscale in Europe and in other markets. And if we look at data coming from other countries, but that cannot be verified, sadly, because data is not open, the methods used are not open. But for example, the Ministry of Technology and Information Communication in China is estimating their own data center energy consumption around 200 terawatts per hour, which doesn't make sense according to the estimates that we have. But since we cannot see what they're including in what they are calling data centers, we actually don't know what's happening in China. And the thing is that from the IEA estimates and based on Sherby and Massonet, they extrapolate from an American data set to the world. And from the Borderstem side, they extrapolate mostly German data and European data to the world. So it's actually very hard to have a precise picture. And that's why we always need to get a more territorial perspective to actually look specifically in countries to see what does it actually means locally, and to set up policies that are effective towards a specific situation, like in Ireland.
So in Ireland, as saying, 14% of Irish electricity, it's an enormous quantity in a very short period of time, like in the history of data centers. And it, people are estimating it'll grow to 30% if the growth of data centers actually continues. So in country environments, or certain country environments, it's a significant element of the electrical mix.
The issue in Ireland is capacity. we need more. If we want to grow the data center sector that much in Ireland, then we need to increase capacity. The fact is, if I understand well, the power provider, Airgrid, doesn't have the enough possibilities to increase its capacity according to the demand of data centers and also to the other sectors' demand. And this issue is not new at all. The same happened in Amsterdam, in Frankfurt, in Singapore. This kind of planning issues always happen. It's because we have a sector with a large power demand increasing very fast, and that is unsettling for many power operators. We had also the same issue in France, in the north of Paris, where basically you have to make a choice that you either follow your energy transition roadmap, which normally include that you need to reduce your energy consumption a lot, or you follow economic development pathway, which will always favor data centers. And I don't know how it is in Ireland, but I know like in France, between now, so let's say 2020 to 2050, we have to reduce our final energy consumption by 40% in 30. So in 30 years, we need to reduce by 40% our energy consumption, which means going from 1,600 terawatt per hour to 900 terawatt per hour by 2050. And that's actually the framing that we need to have in mind when we are analyzing such sectors. What is our energy transition roadmap, and does it fit into it? That's the main issue, because at that moment, you can have the data centers operator in Ireland that will absorb all the renewable capacity being put on the grid and not allowing other sector to get it, and at the same time increasing the demand for electricity. So we'll end up with data centers operators having a very nice CSR report with lowering the carbon intensity of the electricity mix, but not allowing other actors to get it. So at the end, if you look at it from a territorial perspective, it's a zero-sum game.
As you say, the renewables that go to the data center can't go to an ordinary household, or there's a limited capacity for those at the moment in the process. But the bigger picture, or maybe not the bigger, but the electricity, it's part of the overall impact of a data center. But the story that often isn't told that much is its physical infrastructure. Could you give us a bit of a sense of all the other elements of the data center that we need to focus on from an environmental point of view?
So if you take it from a life cycle assessment perspective, the first thing is the construction of the building itself. So sometimes operators will take on old buildings and refurbish them, renovate them according to the specificities that they need for data centers. Then you need to include all energy equipment and cooling equipment. So basically AC, if they're using that, or water cooling system, and also the fact that you will be plugged to the energy grid, and you will need transformators and so on to get the right electricity in, but also all the energy systems that are here in case of power blackout. So which means first batteries, lithium, depends on the technology, but can be lithium batteries that will take on that will take on in case of power blackout and keep bringing electricity to the data center for a few minutes for the engine, like the fuel engine, to kick in and to provide a stable power line. Which means, normally in each data center there is always a turbine, like basically it's like a motor for a boat, with fuel reservoirs, at least to maintain data centers, depending on the operator, from 2 to 4 days, maybe even bigger. So that's the thing you start with, and then you have this building with electricity coming in, you have cooling coming in, and then you need to put your hardware in. And to be fair, from an economic point of view, the most important part of the building is hardware. It's not the building or the energy systems, because you can move your hardware anywhere. That's where you have your value. The building itself is secondary. Obviously, it's not easy to move that all your hardware from one data center to one another, but it's possible. And then this hardware comes with a material footprint. Servers can be quite carbon heavy, but also it depends of how much time you will keep them. Data centers, on average, tend to when we are doing life cycle analysis, we are taking the hypothesis that a server will last at least for 4 to 5 years. And it's what manufacturers are providing as a reference point. Then it depends. In reality, in a big hyperscaler, especially from Google, Amazon, and so on, we have whispers or info that the refresh rate for servers in such facilities is maybe around 18 to 20 months, which does not mean they will be discarded right after. It just means that they will enter a second cycle as refurbished. And that's why in the US there is such a big market for refurbished hardware, server hardware, because there is laws being dropped by Google, Amazon, and so on. And yet, if the server is normally powered all the time, being run 24 hours, 7 days a week, then most of his footprint will come for electricity consumption. Normally, the standard ratio is that the material footprints represent 20%. The manufacturing footprint represents 20% of the overall footprint, and the use phase, the power consumption, represents 80%. But it's based on the scenario where your hardware lasts for 5 years and is not refurbished in between. And then there is the whole end of life thing that I don't really know it, because I only know about refurbished markets for for data center hardware, but I don't know how they are being treated afterwards once they are officially done. And I don't actually know how long a server can last, because it always depends on the operation you are putting in.
It seems that to manufacture a server can be in the region of a ton of CO2, somewhere in that region. A short life for these products is very negative from a manufacturing point of view. If you're constantly going through that cycle, and some of them do go into refurbishment, but some of them, or some of the components, they get physically trashed, don't they, from a security point of view?
Well, for hard drives, yes. And then for for integrated circuits, it depends. And at the end, what we get from that, from a recycling point of view, it's little minerals. It's a mix of aluminium, copper, and something called in French laiton, but I don't know how to say it in English. So we are losing most of the materials. From most of the time when we are dealing with waste going from the digital sector, we are recovering very few metals compared to the diversity of metals that we are putting in input.
Yeah, I saw one study that said that of the e-waste that is recycled, often only about 30%, 30 to 40% of useful materials are actually returned from the actual recycling process.
Yeah, it's because if you just take a smartphone, for example, there's up 50 up to 55 metals in a smartphone with very different volumes, going from milligrams to grams. And most of the rare metals or the small metals will never be recovered, because first, they're in so small quantity, or they've been used in an alloy, or they just cannot be taken back. So we are losing most of our rare and small metals when we are recycling ICT products.
So we've got the hardware, we've got the server hardware, the computer hardware, but we also have electromechanical hardware that is often has a much shorter life cycle than it would have in a factory or the other as well. That I read that about a 15 to 20 year life cycle for the electromechanical hardware, whereas in a typical factory that would be expected to be used for 40 years.
Oh, you mean like generators, batteries?
Generators, air conditioning, but yeah.
I don't know that much on that part. The thing is, we know it lasts less in data centers, but it's also a small part of. I mean, until today, and to my knowledge, it was a small part of the footprint because it's a one-time big equipment with a very low. With relatively long life. But I don't know that much because in LCA we don't include them. In terms of methodology, the construction of the building and putting inside electromechanical equipment is very, very, very rarely accounted for. So actually, I don't have a clear picture of that because we don't have data on that.
Even the buildings are only supposed to last 20 or 40 years. That is a kind of part of this whole digital culture that's nothing is designed to last.
The same in a life cycle assessment, we take the hypothesis that the building will last 20 years. Basically, you get your return after, if I remember well, 5 to 7 years of operation. So after 5 to 7 years, you can consider that you could move out if necessary. And it can depend on many factors, like why would you move your data center out? It can be like that you got a very good deal with electricity somewhere else. It can be also environmental issues. For example, I've never really understood why big hyperscaler were installed in high water stress region, like the west part of the US. And I don't see how this kind of operation can last over more than 20 years, because the water stress in Colorado is already increasing quite fast. And yet we have more and more data centers being constructed in the region. The same goes in Texas, same goes in Utah. So I don't really understand what are the mid to long-term perspective for data center operators. And the fact is, beyond all, is we keep building so much more data centers, be it co-location, hyperscales, or even more like with edge. And I still really don't know how we are building that much regarding the capacity that we already have and the demand that is currently there. So my guess here is that we are keep making new data centers because it's a safe financial asset to invest in, and also because it's based on the perspective that there will be always more services being put in, more computing power being needed, and more transfer and storing capacity needed. But yet it's just based on perspective. It's not something that is taking it into account. So the fact that we might also need to ration or to stop the development of, not to stop, but to at least to slow down the development of data centers worldwide.
There's a couple of things you brought up there. The water crisis, the global, I saw this morning an announcement by the US government for the first time ever, it's treating water as a national security issue, which a historical moment to some extent. But as you've indicated, the southwestern part of the US under historical drought conditions, as are significant other areas in the world. And the UN predicts very significant droughts by 2030 onwards, and croplands, up to 80% of croplands being stressed. And yet, I saw this study, I think by Uptime last year, which said over 60% of data centers don't even bother to measure how much water they're consuming because they don't even think it's a business issue. It's not even worth measuring. And yet we know that data centers can be quite water intensive.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very specific case for the western part of US. I've been trying to track down the water footprint, or at least the water demand of data center operators in that part of the US because of the drought that they were facing in July or August 2021. And first, it's very, very, very hard to get to the data where they are asking for water. Like most companies, data center operators like Facebook or Google or Amazon, they don't use the full name. I mean, they don't use their official company name to make such demands, and they use screen companies or the holding that are in charge of data center development. So first you need to find the name of the company, of the screen company doing that. Then you need to find the dates of the actual meeting of the municipal committee where they're deciding how much water, like when they're agreeing on the water demand of the operator. I did that once for one data center in Utah, for the Facebook Eagle Mountain data center. It took me 4 hours to just find one data point, which is at the starting of their operation. Facebook will ask for 1,000 cube meters of water, and can go up 10, if I remember well, 10,000 cube meters of water once they finish their development. But on average, a Google hyperscale data center will have a water demand of 15,000 cube meters of water. Part of this water is recycled, reused, and so on. And it's not only fresh water being used. They don't need fresh water to cool down a data center. But the biggest picture here is that most of the water footprint of a data center is in the US, and especially in this region, is indirect. It comes from electricity generation. And if I remember well, in US, 80% of the water footprint of data centers is indirect, because producing power has also water intensity that we need to work on, for coming from dams or for steam turbine. And it also applies pressure, because obviously the more power you demand, and the more there is conflict of views about this power, and also on the water that's being used to produce power. And also locally on the water that's being diverted to data center, and that will not go to other activities. So we can also, at some point, it will not be surprising to have conflict of views in California, for example, over water demand between farmers and the data center industry. And most of the time, it's not the farmers that are winning that kind of conflicts.
This kind of leads to, my reading about data centers. When I read from researchers or people like yourself, it's almost a universal response that the data center industry is extraordinarily secretive.
Oh yeah.
And I read that water is, from a Google perspective, is considered a proprietary trade secret, and they won't even allow public officials tell the local community how much water they're using. So why is it that, it's a kind of the irony, isn't it, of data centers? They are the places that store all the information, much of which about our personal lives and what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. So data centers and the Googles and the Facebooks have this extraordinary understanding of our lives. and yet we know hardly anything about them, and they go to extraordinary efforts to be secretive. What are they hiding?
Well, it's I mean, it's a complicated question, but for many people that work on data centers, footprints, we always face the secretive nature of that business. It's very hard to have data and to have actually data that is good enough to be exploited in research. So most of the time you work with whispers or things that you hear when you go to professional events of this industry. But yeah, it's hard to get. When it comes to Google water footprints, no, we are only, what's left is water footprint of the all Google company. So it's an aggregated version of the water footprint, which is quite useless. I mean, if you are looking from a territorial perspective and trying to set up policies at the scale of your state, of your county, aggregated water footprint of Google is useless. If you're doing a national analysis, it can be used. And also it will become, I mean, for me, it will be black boxed even more. I mean, in some facility, I mean, some states, Google is also building its own pumping station. So it will be even harder to know what's been extracted. And even on the power side, Amazon is also building its own, how do you call that in English?
Power station or
power station, substations.
substation.
Yeah. So also you can also see like a verticalization of the business, because they are also starting to develop with commodities such as water or power. And the more they take care of that, they take care of their own operation on that, and the less we're gonna have access to it. And that's a matter of transparency. That's a matter also of local conflict. I think they start to hide it. Obviously, can be said it's a state. It's like a trade secret and so on. But it's also because, I mean, my hypothesis is that data centers are facing more and more local opposition worldwide by local communities, because they start to understand that having a data center nearby comes with a price. And most of the positive impacts are not primarily seen by local communities. When you think of hyperscaler installing themselves in rural communities in Utah, Colorado, and so on, most of the direct employment for local communities will be security, cleaning, and so on. And it's rare to have local people trained into becoming IT engineers. It happens, but it's not for locals. And they come, and also this kind of operation come with a lot of fiscal or financial incentives. Even Data Center Dynamics, like specialized website on that, was making a joke of the Facebook Eagle Mountain data center, where they were claiming that they were contributing up to $2 million to local communities, while they get a tax cut of $150 million. So there's also like a disproportion of that, which also leads to local conflicts that then will result from an increased secrecy around these operations.
As you've indicated, the data center does very little for the community it's in from employment or otherwise. It's not like another traditional industry that becomes part of the community. If it's a supermarket or a dentist or does some, most of the data is not being used by the local community, so to speak. It's going all over the world or whatever. So when a data center comes into a community, it takes far more than it gives.
And it's not a labor-intensive industry to start with. I mean, and also part of it are becoming more and more automated. That I remember there was a big controversy in the north of Paris in 2013 that was studied by a sociologist called Clément Marquet, where the city in the north of Paris calculated that the employment rate for data center in the area was one full-time employee per 10,000 square meters, when the average in the on the in the city was around 50 full-time employees per 10,000 square meters. So it's so way less job intensive.
Data is growing at an extraordinary pace, but according to your understanding, data centers are growing at an even more extraordinary pace. Are we essentially potentially looking at a financial bubble type of situation with data centers over the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, to be fair, I have no idea on that because I don't look that much. I mean, I'm only following from a certain distance the economics and the financial news around data centers. There is a good newsletter to do that, the one from Christian Koch that I receive weekly, and you can see like the amount of financial operation happening in this sector. It's quite insane, and yeah, for me, from my understanding, I don't understand why we are building so much data centers, and also because we are building some data centers where there is already data centers. So it's not an issue of so some data centers could be built for an issue of geographical coverage, which is understanding. But when you look at the map of data centers, they are all concentrated in the same location, and which is around big cities most of the time. And if they're all at the same place, so it means also that the demand is already quite covered. So why are we building more is the question. And I think obviously a forecast about new demands, computing, storage, and so on, and transfer is something. But I think also it's also we need to consider the financial aspect of it as a safe asset to invest. And data centers operators are the safe assets to invest in. They have with steady growth, most of them at least, and everything is working quite well for. Like if you think of Equinix, if you think of digital realties that have been bought recently, they are huge operations and they are still expanding very, very fast and in also new areas, but also consolidating in many other places where they already are. And also at the end, you can see like there will be only few companies left. So there is a concentration of power for data center operators like colocation, like Equinix, Interaction, and so on. That can be the same as the one you see for service industries such as Facebook and so on.
Yeah, this overall concentration that is going on in the tech industry has been going on for the last 20 years. Just so we at a very basic level, data drives data centers, or processing of data drives data centers, or you would think should drive the growth in data centers, the growth of data. But you were talking about, some of the articles I read, that you'd written about the role of data, or measuring data, or that the consumption of data, that you think it's not always directly correlated to more data isn't necessarily more energy consumption, so to speak. Could you go into just explain that a little bit, tease that out a bit?
Historically, we use data traffic as a proxy to forecast the environmental footprints of the ICT sector. But we did that because we didn't have a better proxy, and in a very secretive sector. But it's not because you're increasing traffic that you will increase footprints. If you just think of direct consumption, the only places where data transfer is increasing consumption and in a non-linear way, it's access networks, when you are basically transferring data through a 4G LTE station, but it's represent like maybe 20% of the energy consumption of the station. When you think of data centers, it's not because more data is transferred that directly the electricity consumption will increase. For fixed access network, it's the same. Whatever you put a lot of data or not, it's not influencing that much the power consumption. So it's not easy to use data as a proxy to estimate the carbon footprint. You can use it as when you look backward, once you know like how much electricity has been consumed by your network and how much data has been transferred or compute, then you can do that. But you look at it from an economic point of view. It's because you decide that the 1 gigabyte is the economic unit that you're looking for, like telecommunication operators can do. But we cannot do forecasts out of that, because if you think of it, data transfer will only affect the renewal of public consumption hardware, such as smartphone or hardware, or smartphone or computer, when there is a change of generation for smartphones, and that's pretty much it. When you look at server and data centers, it doesn't affect directly. If you look at networks, it only affects directly, or at least directly enough, remote access network, but it affects indirectly. Then you need to distinguish what is data transfer from a physical point of view and how it affects all infrastructure. So you need to distinguish data transfer from as a physical phenomenon that affects an infrastructure from data transfer as or data traffic as a narrative to justify a change of mobile generation. You can say 4G networks are saturated. We need to upgrade to 5G. Well, that's a narrative that's based on data that says we need to increase our capacity.
You were saying there earlier about how in France, same in Ireland, we have to reduce energy consumption over the next. It's not about it's not an energy production problem we have. It's an energy consumption one if we're going to have a livable planet. But let's say if we, on one side we've got this explosion with Internet of Things or whatever, but if we broadly speaking said we could reduce the amount of data by 40%, or, like the electricity consumption, at a macro level, that would have an impact, wouldn't it? It would, basically, if the data centers are growing in the hope that we're going to have massive Internet of Things data in the process. So whereas at a gigabyte level, it's hard, to track, but, at a macro level, more data at the zettabyte level, the explosion in zettabytes of data, if we could reduce that by 40%, that would be a good thing.
Well, if we say that the whole volume of data traffic will be reduced in 10 years, well, it will obviously affect the way we are building capacities. We'll build less data centers because we'll assume that the forecast will be negative in the future. And so we also reconsider building the new generation of networks. But I have my doubts on that because like we've been pushing 5G, saying in France, saying like 4G saturated, so we need to go to the next generation. But if it was not for that, they will have found another narrative. And actually, the fact we are pushing 5G is mostly to deal with to massive machine connections. So I think it will just be a change of narrative. to keep developing a sector that is profitable. So at the end, the question is, can the sector be profitable with keep going profitable with less data to handle? And that's actually quite an interesting question, because most of the business model of, let's say, Google or Facebook is based on data collection, profiling, and getting better data and so on. And so and even the way we are training models is based on massive use in use of massive data sets. So the way we are developing the ICT sector is based on an abundance of data. So could it be profitable if we are not based on that immensity of data production? Is a good question, and to be sure, it will be correlated with energy consumption if we reduce the overall capacity of our infrastructure, or even if we stabilize it, because if we stabilize the sector as it is today and build way less data centers and keep maintaining our networks as they are for a while, with the efficiency gain that we have, we could actually be able to reduce energy consumption. But to be fair, I think that's not a big worry of the ICT sector, because I think most researchers on the topic agree that energy consumption of the data sector, of the ICT sector, especially with electricity, will increase largely in the coming years, and they will lower the carbon emission by integrating way more renewable energy, and also by buying compensation and using mechanisms such as power purchase agreements to guarantee themselves renewable energy. But the fact is, anyway we need to reduce our energy production, because we also need to reduce our material footprints, and renewable energy are much more intense when it comes to material intensity. So if we're reducing our energy consumption, our final energy consumption is also reducing our material intensity.
A lot of my work over the last 20 or 30 years has been working in organizations, big organizations, and helping them better manage their websites or intranets or things like that. And a pattern I kept noticing again and again, this is from 96, 97 onwards, is that basically 80-90% of the data in an organization was crap. Was you really low level. The intranets worked better if we deleted 90% of the pages. Wherever I went, whatever organization I worked with, there was this massive quantities of really totally useless data. And the more I've researched this area, I've found studies that say that only about 5% of data is actively managed on a process. So anywhere, from 80 to 90 to 95% of data, after a couple of months, even most of it, when it's collected, has no reason to be collected in the process. So maybe that's partly why data centers are extremely secretive as well, because they're actually really data dumps, and they're pretending to be these wonderful places which store tremendously useful stuff, but really they are dumping grounds for the 1.4 trillion photos that we take a year, the 99% that we will never look at again, and that we really do need a review of data, because if we've less data, as you say, I mean, we don't need 5G. 5G is a marketing, other than, factories and medical institutions, the vast majority of people can get perfectly by on 4G in the process. So we are actually getting new infrastructure, not because we need it as a society, but to meet superficial wants of downloading 8K videos that we can't see the difference between an 8K video and a 2K video in the process. So we actually have got into a cycle of data for data's sake, or data for the sake of making money for the data centers, even though the vast majority of that data is extraordinarily poor quality.
I mean, like, from my perspective, the fact is, when we are talking about data center development and so on, or even data production, is that we are missing the framework in which we should evaluate these kind of things. Is the roadmap for energy transitions, all the roadmaps that we should actually follow if we want to reach our goal of +2 I mean, if we reaching a +2 degree world is not really a goal, but if we at least want to stabilize global warming on Earth, and trying also to reduce the increase of other planetary limits, we need to think from that and not around that. And when you think like we need to reduce by 40% of final energy consumption in 30 years, there is many things that need to be rethink, and even the way we are developing the ICT sector. Indeed, the ICT sector is based on massive data production, and by organization, by users, by many people. But it makes sense in a world that make money out of data production, whatever the quality, because you can anyway enhance the quality by crossing this kind of data sets, and try to until you make something that can be useful from a marketing perspective or from a data profiling perspective. So even if we create like low quality data, we can find ways to make it useful from a specific perspective. This is the one from the business model we are following right now. But indeed, the question of thinking of a ST sector that is not based on massive data production is very challenging, and it's at the same time very interesting, because it's hard to think how we can get there. And also it's hard to assess what data is worthwhile or not from a user perspective. And we don't have constraints anymore that make you have this reflective process of should I keep it or not. For many people that lived in a world with lower quality or more expensive data, the process of picking pictures makes sense because there was overall constraints. Nowadays there is not that much constraints. The fact is we are in a massive data production world ecosystem, is that because we are lowering constraints and making them visible. And that's my take on it. It's like when you think of the overall constraints that should be there and are not, then obviously you are producing behavior and business models that are based on dump data.
A lot of this data that is actually useful is driving the consumption we're trying to reduce. Like a lot of the biggest IT companies in the world are now advertising companies. I mean, Google is an advertising company. Facebook is an advertising company. Technology is a side impact of what they do, but where Google makes 80% of its revenue through advertising, Facebook makes 95%. They are advertising companies. So they're using data to actually drive superficial consumption in the vast majority of situations. So even the so-called useful data is actually destructive of a livable planet in the future. So I think sooner or later we need to have a serious policy look at data may be the secret driver of the climate crisis.
I mean, it depends, because it depends on your definition of data, and I think we need much more precision on what you call data, because between weather data or satellites data for climate monitoring from health data to advertisement, to data used for advertisement, there is a huge gap, which means that if you need to assess which data should be kept, then you need a framework that is a highly moral perspective. But I would take it the other way, by saying like actually what's happening in Ireland is can be seen as an interesting experiment, because if I remember well, EarGrid put a constraint on the sector, on the capacity of the sector, because there would be no more new data centers in Dublin until 2028, if I remember well. Which means if data production keeps increasing, then part of it will be what will be taken care of by data center already existing, and some of it will be deported elsewhere. And it will be interesting to look at that other patterns that we'll have from this region to see how it works. But I don't know. It's not very interesting what I'm saying actually at the moment. I don't know what to think actually about your proposal.
Okay.
I need time to think, I think.
If you're interested in these sorts of ideas, please check out my book, Worldwide Waste, at jerrymcgovern.com. To hear other interesting podcasts, please visit thisishcd.com.